Hey, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my current top 10 decks in the standard format heading into the upcoming San Antonio Regional Championships. San Antonio is expected to be one of the largest major Pokemon TCG tournaments of the year. Today, I'm going to be going over where I think the metagame stands. If you're looking for any of these deck lists as well, make sure to check out the description. All right, let's hop right into it. Alrighty, hopping into number 10 here, we have Iron Thorns Dragapult. Iron Thorns Dragapult is still one of the stronger decks in the format, and the strategy of the deck is relatively simple. Your goal is to sit behind that Iron Thorns with that ability slowing your opponent's Pokemon down, and then use Volt Cyclone to move energies onto Dragaloaks and Dragapults that you have set up over the previous turns. That Iron Thorns has been an active spot. You also have things like Toedscruel as well. Toedscruel very nice versus decks like Regidrago, stopping them from being able to take cards off Legacy Star from the discard pile if it is in play, forcing decks to deal with a one prizer, especially when you're just mainly a two prize attacking deck, is actually quite nice here. Yeah, I mean, the deck is still pretty powerful. It doesn't necessarily do anything exceptionally well, but it doesn't really necessarily have a whole lot of, really tough matchups. It kind of has a chance versus the majority of the top decks, but it can sometimes run into some consistency issues if you aren't able to get that TM evolution off into the Dragaloaks. Your deck can feel a little bit inconsistent at times, but when you do get it set up, it is pretty powerful. All right, let's hop into number 9. Alrighty, hopping into number 9 here, we have Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt is still powerful, in my opinion, the strongest of the turbo decks right now. Strategy is pretty simple. You want to use things like Teal Mask and Sawdust to get tons of energy onto the board, and then you use that Bellowing Thunder to deal large amounts of damage. The only, I think, spicy card that I have currently in my list right now is the Briar, as Charizard has came back and has seen plenty of success right now. So having access to Briar is quite nice. Actually makes that matchup relatively close. You actually have a realistic shot of taking down Zard with the Briar if you are able to pull it off. Also can help out against some of those one prize decks as well. Can definitely steal some games. But yeah, this is still one of the more powerful decks that hasn't necessarily had a breakthrough performance in quite some time after its regional win at the Louisville Regional Championships a few months back, but you still see it performing decently. There are usually plenty in the second day of competition, seeing at least some success. It's fast, it's relatively consistent, and yeah, I think it makes a decent play heading into this tournament. Its biggest calling card is that it does have a solid Regidrago matchup, and if Regidrago is going to continue to be the most popular deck, that is one of the nice things about this deck, is you do take a relatively decent matchup against arguably the best deck in the standard format. So that is a big thing that Raging Bolt has going for it. And with things like Briar, there's a chance you could potentially steal some games off some of your harder matchups. All right, let's hop into number 8. Alrighty, hopping into number 8 here, we have Cloth. Cloth is a deck that I still think is relatively powerful in this format. It takes a good matchup against a lot of those turbo decks that are trying to take down Regidrago, and you also have a close Regidrago matchup, so you cover some of those matchups quite nicely. However, you do take pretty rough matchups against decks like Charizard and Gardevoir, which are some of the big matchups that are really holding this deck back. I will also say as well, this deck can sometimes feel a little bit inconsistent at times. If it is able to get that explosive setup, getting a early game Precious Trolley, being able to completely fill up the board, you thin the deck nicely, your deck is really, really powerful. However, when you are in situations where you aren't able to get that super fast setup, your deck can feel a little bit clunky at times as you aren't able to thin properly, and you can run into some problems. But when the deck gets going, it is really, really powerful, and I definitely would not be surprised to see some place well. Cloth, still a solid deck, and I definitely have some respect for it. All right, let's hop to number 7. Alrighty, hopping into number 7 here, we have Terapagos. Terapagos is back. Terapagos kind of fell off over the past couple of months, hasn't necessarily been seeing a whole lot of success, but it has made its return, getting top 8 at the most recent Birmingham Regional Championships, and there were multiple in day 2. So the deck has been performing well again, and I think it's in a pretty decent spot. You have close matchups against some of the most powerful decks in the format, like Regidrago and also Charizard. Your matchup against decks like Gardevoir feel relatively good if you are able to get that early game Dusknoir off with that Curse Blast, being able to wipe their Curlias off the board. And yeah, you are relatively consistent and fast. You are just able to kind of run decks off the board very, very quickly with an explosive second turn of the game. The deck feels good. The deck feels very, very powerful right now. There are a couple different ways to play it. You can play the Regidrago VSTAR engine, or you can play the slower variant with things like Bouffalant, Penny, and also Professor Turo. Both variants, I think, are good. And yeah, the turtle is still existing in format. I will say that although your Zard matchup is close, you can sometimes run into problems, especially if they are able to survive those early turns where you try and wipe all their Charmanders or Pidgeys off the board. If they are able to survive, you can run into some problems. But if Regidrago continues to see a ton of success pushing down those Charizard, then you might not have to deal with that matchup. So if you're able to avoid that, definitely quite nice. Another thing as well is that since you don't play a whole lot of draw supporters, if you aren't able to get that Fan Rotom off on that first turn, sometimes your deck can kind of fall apart. So making sure that you get that Fan Rotom out consistently is really the key of the deck, but sometimes you aren't able to do that. But yeah, Terapagos is still very, very strong, and I think it's going to see some success coming up. Alrighty, hopping into number 6 here, we have Palkia. Palkia came storming back at the Birmingham Regional Championships and really surprised a lot of people with its performances. There were 3 in top cut, and they saw a lot of success in the tournament overall. Not a ton of people played the deck, but the deck did really, really well, and I have to give it its flowers here and put it in the top 10, coming in at number 6. Palkia is a pretty strong deck right now in the format because you do pretty well against decks like Regidrago, just being able to kind of run them over, going 2-2-2 really, really fast and consistently, and it can be pretty difficult for Regidrago to slow down. You are also decent against a lot of the turbo decks as well, because you have that Thorton, so you can go from a all 1 prize board state into a 2 prizer and start to initiate that 2 prize card trade, which is really nice. However, the biggest thing holding this deck back is the Zard matchup. The Zard matchup is just really bad. If you play against a Zard deck that is able to fully set up and get going, you can run into a lot of problems in that matchup. If Zard wasn't a competitively viable deck, this deck might be in the top 2 or 3 decks in the format, but that deck, unfortunately, is the biggest thing holding it back. It's good against decks like Regidrago or Gardevoir. However, you really want to avoid Charizard when playing Palkia. If you can, you have a really, really powerful deck, and a deck that can definitely go quite far in the tournament. Alrighty, hopping into number 5, we have Archaludon. Archaludon is still a really powerful deck in the format, and this is going to be the list that Burt Walters used to get top 32 at the most recent Birmingham Regional Championships. I really like this list because of that Bayonet with that puppet offering ability, allowing you to discard the Pokemon from play and get a supporter card from the discard pile and put it into your hand. Really, really nice just to be able to finish games, because you can evolve it at the beginning of the game and just sit it on the board. And then when you need something like that Boss's Orders to finish off the game, you can then just simply use that ability and grab Boss's Orders and finish the game off. One of the biggest things that this deck has going for it is a strong Regidrago matchup. You do pretty well against Regidrago. You have the option to Star Chronos to end games, and you can also just go boss, boss, boss to be able to take out their 2 prizers consistently. And since you have 300 HP, you can't get one-shot by something like that Lost Impact unless they use something like Phantom Diver Kieran first. So you have a lot of things going for you in that matchup, which is, I think, the biggest thing going for this deck. You do take a relatively sketchy matchup against Charizard. Your Gardevoir matchup is also close, but if you are able to get that Star Chronos off, you can take over games. Archaludon, still a really powerful deck. I expect it to do well, and this would be the list that I would be playing if I was playing the deck. Alrighty, hopping into number 4 here, we have Lugia VSTAR. Lugia VSTAR, when it gets going, is arguably the most powerful deck in the format. However, that is the asterisk that you always have to put on Lugia's power level, is when it gets going. Sometimes it's just not able to get going. But I actually think in this format, if you are able to get set up, your matchup spread is pretty good. You take a favorable Regidrago matchup, which is important. Your Charizard matchup is close. Your Gardevoir matchup is relatively fine as well. If you are able to get off a turn to Wellspring or Iron Hands, your matchup against a lot of the turbo decks, if you're able to get turn 2 Summoning Star, is relatively good. You're just good against a lot of decks in the format right now, especially being able to take a favorable Regidrago matchup is important, and also with decks like Palkia starting to see more play if you are able to set up against that deck. Having access to Cinccino can be really important to flip that prize trade into your favor. So yeah, Lugia is really powerful as long as it gets going, and that's the biggest thing holding it back. I think it makes a pretty good play for this tournament. I definitely expect it to see some success. I think it's a lot stronger right now than people give it credit for, which is why I have it in the top 4. So yeah, Lugia is good as long as you get going. All right, let's hop into number 3. Alrighty, hopping into number 3 here, we have Gardevoir. Gardevoir has made its return over the past couple of weeks, beginning to see success once again in tournaments with that Unfair Stamp, that slow, tanky build with cards like Unfair Stamp, Double Turo, Triple Dark Energy, and 2 Monkey Dory has just felt so good in testing. It feels like you have a shot in the majority of games. Gardevoir still really good right now. I will say that the Charizard matchup is sketchy, although you have access to that Mawile to trap the Pidgeot and set up knockouts. That matchup still is relatively scary if they know how to play against it, and also things like Regidrago is a still very close matchup. I will say that I think Gardevoir's biggest issue isn't that it takes a lot of bad matchups, is that it kind of is 50-50 into like the majority of the top decks, which is sometimes kind of an issue because if you're playing in a best of 3, if you're like winning one game and then losing the next one because the matchup is relatively 50, you can sometimes run into tie problems. So you have to be very conscientious on how much time you have left with the stack, as it can be a little bit slow, and you can sometimes run into problems where you aren't able to finish 3 full games. So yeah, Gardevoir also, I guess, at the beginning of games can sometimes struggle to getting ran off the board if you aren't able to find that TM evolution. But if you are able to get set up, you have a ton of cool plays. You can make lots of outplay potential as well. Probably the deck with the second most outplay potential, if not the most outplay potential right now in the format. So that definitely is going for it. So yeah, Gardevoir still very powerful. Can sometimes run into some time problems. You're kind of close into everything, and your Zard matchup isn't necessarily great. But I still think it's really powerful. If you are able to play this deck well, you get set up, you can go very far. All right, let's hop into number 2. Alrighty, hopping into number 2 here, we have Charizard. Charizard most recently won the Birmingham Regional Championships, and the metagame is coming around to Charizard again, allowing it to see quite a bit of success. We are seeing lots of anti-Regidrago decks, for example, things like Palkia. You still have the Turbo decks as well that exist in the format. Terapagos with the Bouffalance as well has been seeing some play. And Charizard does pretty decently against the majority of those decks. So if we see a lot of decks trying to counter Regidrago, Charizard does well against those counters. And if Regidrago's play rate kind of starts to dip a little bit, then Charizard's in a really good spot. The biggest thing holding this deck back is, though, the Regidrago matchup. Regidrago is not a great matchup overall. If you do play against it, you can run into some problems, especially if they are able to get set up. They have access just to so many things that they can do against you. They can Phantom Dive you, they can Kieran you, they can attack you with things like the Teal Mask as well. So you can run into a lot of problems against that matchup. However, if you are able to dodge it, you definitely have a deck that can go really far, and you still have a chance against that matchup. Zard overall, still one of the best decks in the format, especially with decks that you do well against, like Palkia, seeing quite a bit of success. It definitely has positioned itself well heading into San Antonio. But I do think there was one deck that is slightly stronger heading into this weekend. Many of you already know what it is. Let's hop into number 1. Hopping into number 1 here, we have Regidrago VSTAR. Regidrago VSTAR, in my opinion, and in many people's opinions, is the strongest deck in the format. Not a whole lot to say here on Regidrago. It has a chance versus the majority of decks. You're fast, you're relatively consistent as well. You have so much outplay potential, lots of different things you can do, tons of versatility. You have everything going for it. I think the deck is really good. I think it's going to see success, especially after Charizard most recently won Birmingham. We might see a little bit of an uptick in Charizard's play rate, which is good for Regidrago. So anyways, that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know if I missed any decks you think that deserve to squeak in to the top 10. Feel free to put those in comments. But anyways, that's going to do it for today. Thanks so much for all the support. As always, I appreciate it. We are doing a booster box giveaway as well. You can check out the community tab on my YouTube channel. Make sure to enter into that. As we get closer to 10,000 subscribers, we will be announcing that soon. So anyways, thanks for all the support as always. I appreciate it. This is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you guys again soon. Peace out.